The rain fell on London in that peculiarly persistent way it has, a soft, shimmering curtain that blurred the lights of the passing cars and turned the mall into a mirror of wet asphalt. Inside the gilded cage of Clarence House, the atmosphere was far heavier than any English drizzle. King Charles III stood by the tall window of his study, his forehead resting against the cool glass. He wasn't seeing the cars or the tourists huddled under umbrellas. He was seeing a chessboard, and every move he made felt like it could topple the kingdom. His private secretary, a man who had seen monarchs come and go with the same impassive expression, stood silently by the door, holding a folder thick with disappointment. The news was not good. The state visit by the Emperor of Japan, a meticulously planned diplomatic overture of immense importance, was in jeopardy. The linchpin, the human element that made these cold political machines work, was missing. Camilla, the queen, was unwell. It wasn't just a simple cold. It was a bout of the lingering after-effects of a chest infection that had plagued her for weeks, one that her doctors insisted needed complete rest. The grueling schedule of a state visit, a banquet for 150 dignitaries, a bilateral trade meeting, a tour of a cultural exhibition, and the centerpiece, a formal dinner at Buckingham Palace, was simply out of the question. The king, ever protective of his wife, had put his foot down. No, he had told the medical team, his voice quiet but absolute. We will not risk her health for a photograph. But the void her absence created was a chasm. The British monarchy, for all its ancient ritual, runs on the fuel of presence. The queen consort was the hostess, the warm smile, the conversationalist who could put a nervous foreign dignitary at ease. Without her, the entire visit felt lopsided, a grand performance missing its leading lady. Your Majesty, the private secretary began, his voice a low murmur. We have considered the Lord Chamberlain, or perhaps the Princess Royal. Princess Anne is immensely capable and respected. Charles turned from the window. In the soft light, the lines on his face seemed deeper, carved by a lifetime of waiting and the sudden, crushing weight of the crown. Anne is scheduled to open the new agricultural college in Scotland. She has been looking forward to it for months, and it's important to her, to me. He shook his head. No, we need someone who represents the heart of this family. Someone new. The name hung in the air between them, unspoken. It was a name that had for years been associated with scandal and division, a name the tabloids had once screamed with vitriol. Now it was a whisper of a different kind of possibility. Catherine, the king said softly, almost to himself. The private secretary blinked, a rare crack in his professional armor. The Princess of Wales, sir. Yes. The word was firmer now. Charles moved from the window and sat behind his mahogany desk, the weight of history pressing on his shoulders. This is a new reign. We speak of modernization, of a slimmed-down monarchy. But it's not just about fewer people, it's about the right people. Catherine has shown nothing but grace, nothing but dedication. She has earned her place, not just in this family, but in the affection of this nation. He thought of her, not as a princess in a magazine, but as a mother he had watched with her children, a woman of quiet strength and fierce loyalty. He remembered her at Prince Philip's funeral, a solitary figure in black, providing a silent anchor of support for his son. He remembered the work she did on early childhood development, work that was substantive, not ceremonial. She possessed a warmth that was not manufactured for the cameras, a genuine quality that Camilla herself often spoke of with admiration. It's highly unconventional, Your Majesty, the secretary cautioned gently. The princess is third in line. She has her own young family. To thrust her into the role of primary hostess for a state visit, effectively taking the Queen's place, the press will have a field day, and there will be comparisons. There will be scrutiny. Charles gave a weary, knowing smile. There is always scrutiny. That is the air we breathe. But this could be a statement that this family is united, that we support one another, and that the future is strong. Catherine is not just the future. She is the present. The decision once made felt like a key turning in a lock. It was daring, yes. It was unprecedented. But the king had spent a lifetime watching and learning, and he knew that sometimes the boldest move was also the most human one. He picked up the phone, his fingers hesitating for only a moment before dialing the number for Adelaide Cottage. The call was answered on the second ring. It wasn't a servant, but a slightly breathless voice. "Hello, Papa?" The sound of his grandson, Prince Louis, caught him off guard, and a genuine soft laugh escaped him. "Louis, it's Grandpapa. Is your mummy there?" There was a muffled shout, the sound of running feet, and then a clearer, calmer voice. "Your Majesty." Catherine's voice was always a balm, respectful but never fawning. "William's wife," he said, using the private term of endearment he sometimes employed. "I need to ask you something. It is a great deal to ask, and you must feel perfectly free to say no. But I find myself and the country in need of your help." In the ensuing silence on the line, Charles could picture her, perhaps sitting on the edge of a sofa, a child's toy in her hand, her brow furrowed in concentration. He laid out the situation. Camilla's illness, the importance of the Japanese visit, the gaping hole in the schedule. He told her he wanted her to step in. Not just to attend a single event, but to be the central hostess, to stand beside him, to welcome an emperor. When he finished, he braced himself for a list of reasons why it couldn't be done. The children, the pressure, the protocol. Instead, her reply was simple and direct. "Of course. Tell me what I need to know, and when I need to be there." It was that simple acceptance, that lack of drama or fanfare, that struck the king most profoundly. It was the response of a true partner, a true member of the family. He ended the call with a profound sense of relief, tinged with an emotion he hadn't expected: pride. The next few days would be a trial by fire for his daughter-in-law, but he had an unshakable feeling she would emerge from the flames not just unscathed, but radiant. The first test was not a public one, but a private tutorial held in the opulent surroundings of the Belgian suite at Buckingham Palace. For 3 hours, Catherine sat in a straight-backed chair while the Lord Chamberlain, a man whose knowledge of court etiquette was as deep as the palace foundations, walked her through the minefield of imperial protocol. "Do not, under any circumstances, touch the emperor," he intoned, his voice dry as old parchment. "Physical contact is to be initiated solely by His Imperial Majesty. When you curtsy, you must hold it for a full 3 seconds longer than for a visiting head of state. The Emperor's personal staff will be announced in a specific order, which you have in your folder. The seating arrangement at the dinner is a cartographical representation of diplomatic relations stretching back 50 years. You must memorize not only who sits where, but the key talking points for each of your neighbors." Catherine listened, her eyes never leaving his face, her mind a sponge. She asked pointed questions. If the emperor compliments a piece of art in the room, is it appropriate to offer him a private viewing the following day, or would that be perceived as pushy? The empress is known to be a keen gardener. Is it permitted to steer the conversation towards the palace's own rose gardens, or is that too provincial a topic? The Lord Chamberlain, initially skeptical of this unorthodox arrangement, found himself impressed. This was not a royal dilettante looking for a photo opportunity. This was a professional preparing for a mission. Later, she was joined by Charles himself. They went over the guest list together, two people huddled over a document, their heads close. He pointed out the Japanese trade minister, a formidable negotiator. "He will try to talk business. Steer him towards his love of jazz music. It's his weakness. You'll have a friend for life." Catherine smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached her eyes. "And the Imperial Chamberlain's wife? It says here she's a noted calligrapher." Charles looked at her, surprised. "I didn't know that. How did you—" "I looked her up," Catherine said simply. "I thought it might be nice to mention it." In that moment, Charles saw it clearly. This wasn't just about duty. It was about kindness. It was about the small, human connections that made these grand, intimidating occasions actually work. Camilla had this gift, and he now saw it, bright and clear, in Catherine. He reached over and placed a hand on hers. "You are going to be magnificent." The day of the Emperor's arrival dawned cold and bright, a perfect winter's day. The ceremonial welcome on Horse Guards Parade was a spectacle of brass bands, gleaming cavalry, and ancient pageantry. Catherine stood a step behind the king, the cold wind nipping at her cheeks, which were already flushed with a mixture of cold and nerves. She wore a Catherine Walker coat in a deep, regal blue, a bold choice that signaled confidence without seeking to overshadow. As the Emperor's state car pulled up, she felt a flutter in her chest. This was it. The world's press, thousands of them, were watching. Every micro-expression would be analyzed, every gesture dissected. The Emperor emerged, a man of slight build but immense presence. The king stepped forward, shaking his hand with warm, formal respect. Then it was Catherine's turn. She stepped forward, her movements fluid and graceful. She lowered herself into a curtsy so deep and held it for so long, it seemed to suspend time itself. It was a gesture of such profound respect, such perfect adherence to the protocol she had been taught, that a murmur seemed to ripple through the assembled dignitaries. When she rose, her eyes met the Emperor's, and she offered a small, genuine smile. It was not the smile of a princess performing a duty. It was the smile of a hostess welcoming a very important guest into her home. The Emperor, a man renowned for his inscrutable public face, gave the slightest inclination of his head, a subtle but unmistakable signal of approval. The first hurdle was cleared. The next few hours were a whirlwind. At the exhibition of Japanese art at the Royal Academy, Catherine walked beside the Empress, their conversation a gentle hum. She had clearly done her homework. She didn't just make small talk. She asked the Empress about her favorite period of Japanese art, about a specific technique used in a silk screen they were viewing. The Empress, initially reserved, began to warm, a genuine look of interest crossing her features as she explained the intricacies of the art form to her young, attentive companion. Later, at a reception for the Japanese community in Britain, Catherine was in her element. She moved through the crowd with an ease that seemed innate, stopping to talk to a group of Japanese students, asking them about their studies, laughing at a comment one of them made. She didn't stand on ceremony, she listened. She made people feel seen. Palace aides, watching from the sidelines, exchanged glances. The Princess of Wales was not just filling a role, she was redefining it. But the true test, the one that loomed largest in everyone's mind, was the state banquet that evening. It was the pinnacle of diplomatic theater. The Buckingham Palace ballroom, glittering under the light of 6 colossal crystal chandeliers, was a vision of gold and white. The table, stretching for over 150 feet, was a masterpiece of floral arrangements, Georgian silver-gilt plate, and the famous Royal Worcester porcelain. Every place setting was a work of art. Catherine prepared in her old apartment, a quiet space away from the frantic bustle. She chose her gown carefully, a white, off-the-shoulder creation by Jenny Packham, adorned with delicate silver embroidery. It was elegant, regal, and utterly timeless. She wore the Queen Mary lover's knot tiara, the diamonds catching the light and throwing tiny rainbows onto the walls. As she looked in the mirror, she didn't see a princess. She saw a representative, a symbol. She took a deep breath, steadied her nerves, and went to meet her destiny. The processional into the ballroom was a symphony of rustling silk and murmured titles. The king, resplendent in his white tie and decorations, led the emperor. Then came the queen's absence. The person who should have been on the arm of the imperial crown prince was Catherine. She walked with a poise that belied the hammering of her heart, her hand resting lightly on his forearm. As they reached their places, the magnitude of what was happening seemed to dawn on the assembled guests. The Princess of Wales, the young woman once cruelly dubbed Weighty Katie by the press, was now seated in the place of the queen consort to the right of the Emperor of Japan. The room settled, the chatter dying down as the king rose to give his toast. His speech was eloquent, touching on the long history between the two island nations. But it was his final words that caused a palpable shift in the atmosphere. He spoke of family, of continuity, and of the strength that comes from unity. He then raised his glass, not just to the emperor, but with a specific warm glance towards Catherine. "And I am profoundly grateful," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "to have my beloved daughter-in-law beside me this evening, a pillar of strength and grace for our family." It was a public acknowledgement, a royal seal of approval broadcast to the world. Thus across the table, Catherine's eyes glistened for a fraction of a second. She held his gaze and gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod of thanks. The dinner itself was a masterclass in diplomacy. Catherine, seated between the emperor and his son, navigated the conversation with breathtaking skill. With the emperor, she spoke of conservation, a shared passion, deftly referencing his work on marine protection and linking it to the Prince of Wales's own environmental initiatives. With the Crown Prince, a known sports enthusiast, she talked about the upcoming Rugby World Cup, lightening the mood with a playful bet on the outcome of a potential England-Japan match. Later in the evening, after the speeches and the formalities had ended, a moment of pure, unscripted humanity occurred. As the guests mingled, the imperial chamberlain's wife, the calligrapher, was standing somewhat awkwardly on the edge of a group. Catherine excused herself from a conversation with the Duke and approached her. "I hope you don't mind me saying," Catherine began, her voice warm, "but I was so fascinated to learn about your work in calligraphy. It's such a meditative art form. Do you find it informs the rest of your life?" The woman, Mrs. Sato, was utterly taken aback. Her face flushed with pleasure. For the next 10 minutes they talked, heads together, about ink, about brush strokes, about the patience required to create something beautiful. It was a private conversation in a room full of public spectacle, and it spoke volumes about the character of the princess. Mrs. Sato later confided to a palace aide, "She is not just a princess. She is a real person. She has a beautiful heart." As the evening drew to a close and the last of the guests departed, Charles found Catherine standing by one of the tall windows, looking out at the empty mall. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a profound exhaustion. He walked up and stood beside her. "You did it," he said simply. "You were more than magnificent. You were you, and that, my dear, was exactly what was needed." Catherine turned to him, and for the first time that day, let her guard down. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, a mixture of relief and overwhelming emotion. "I was so terrified of letting you down, of letting everyone down. I just wanted to make you proud." Charles, a man not always comfortable with overt displays of physical affection, nevertheless reached out and pulled her into a gentle paternal hug. "Hey, my dear girl," he murmured into her hair. "You have made us all proud. You have shown the world what I have always known. You are the heart of this family." It was a private moment, unseen by any camera, a silent compact of love and respect between a king and his daughter-in-law. It was the real story behind the headlines. The following morning, the world woke up to a new narrative. The front pages were not filled with the usual speculation or division. Instead, they showed a gallery of images from the banquet. Catherine in her white gown, laughing with the emperor, Catherine listening intently to the empress, Catherine, a picture of serene confidence, walking through the palace. The headlines were unanimous in their praise. "A new star is born," declared the Times. "Catherine steals the show," said the Mail. But the more thoughtful pieces dug deeper. They spoke of the passing of a torch, of the seamless transition from one generation to the next. They noted the king's visible pride and the obvious warmth between them. More importantly, the reaction from Clarence House was one of quiet, dignified satisfaction. A senior royal source, in a carefully worded statement, said, "The king has always had the utmost faith in the Princess of Wales. This week has simply reinforced his belief that she is one of the greatest assets of the monarchy. Her support for her family and for her country is unwavering." The most poignant reaction, however, came from Camilla. Still resting at Clarence House, she had watched parts of the banquet on a small television in her room. As she saw Catherine gracefully navigate the evening, like a single tear rolled down her cheek. It was not a tear of jealousy or bitterness. It was a tear of profound relief and a deep maternal pride. She had worried about letting her husband down, about leaving him to face such a challenge alone. Seeing Catherine there, strong and capable, lifted a weight from her own shoulders. She immediately called Catherine the next morning. "My darling," Camilla's voice was still a little weak, but filled with warmth. "I cannot thank you enough. You were wonderful, absolutely wonderful. I watched it all, and my heart was just bursting with pride." Catherine, sitting in her garden at Adelaide Cottage, watching her children play, felt a lump form in her throat. "I was just so worried about you, Camilla. I hope you're resting. I just did what anyone would do." "No," Camilla said, her tone firm. You did what no one else could do. You held the family together. You held the king's hand. And you did it with a grace that I could only dream of. You are a credit to us all." The bond between the two women, always cordial and respectful, deepened in that moment. It was no longer just a relationship by marriage. It was a bond forged in the fire of shared duty and mutual respect. The aftermath of the state visit was a subtle but permanent shift in the landscape of the monarchy. For Catherine, it was a transformation. She was no longer just the Duchess of Cambridge, the mother of the future king. She was now, undeniably, a queen-in-waiting in the truest sense, a woman of proven substance and immense capability. The public's affection for her, already considerable, deepened into a profound respect, and they had seen her not just as a figurehead, but as a worker, a diplomat, a woman of genuine warmth and intelligence. For Prince William, watching his wife from the sidelines, the experience was one of awe and a deepened love. He had always known she was strong, but to see her operate on such a global stage, with such poise under such immense pressure, filled him with a pride he could barely articulate. That evening, after the children were in bed, he took her in his arms. "I am the luckiest man in the world," he whispered into her hair, "not because I'm a prince, but because I get to call you my wife." For the king, the week had been a vindication of his instincts. His daring step had not been a gamble. It had been an investment in the future. And he saw in Catherine the qualities that would be essential for the monarchy to survive and thrive in the coming decades: empathy, intelligence, a connection to the people, and an unshakable sense of duty. He began to include her more in the red boxes of state papers, seeking her opinion on matters of national importance. He invited her to join him and William for private meetings with the Prime Minister. He was consciously and lovingly mentoring his successor's successor. The story of those few days in London became a legend whispered in the corridors of power. It was the story of a king who had the wisdom to ask for help and a princess who had the strength to answer the call. It was a story of a family that, despite its ancient traditions and relentless public scrutiny, was at its core just a family, bound together by love, the loyalty, and a shared sense of purpose. The rain had stopped. In its place, over Buckingham Palace, the sun was beginning to shine on a new and brilliant chapter in the history of the British monarchy. The king's daring step had not just filled a void, it had illuminated the path forward.